Now, I'm supposed to speak about almost everything, which gives me a clear leeway so that I can talk about anything I want to, obviously. And to begin with, I must tell you of a situation which I am in now, in which a great triumph has turned into the possibility of a catastrophic defeat, thus explaining what the Greeks mean by hubris. I presume you all know there's been a motion picture called Fantastic Voyage. And you all know that I wrote a book based on the movie. Well, I write fast and the movie people work slowly, and the book came out 6 months before the movie, right? So now everybody thinks that the movie was made from the book. And people come up to, well, first they think I'm a millionaire. Secondly, they want to know if I met Raquel Welch. And I'm not a millionaire, and I don't mind. But I haven't met Raquel Welch either, and that I mind. And then they also think this is a great thing that they made a movie out of my book, and they want to know if it isn't true that I feel pretty disgusted that they're having introduced errors. And I said, no, I took out the errors. So what with one thing and another, I've gone around pretty, what shall I say, smug about the fact that everyone thinks that they've made a movie out of one of my books. I'm very honest about it. I explained to everyone that, no, the movie came first, I made it out of that, but I can't explain it to everyone, you know.
Check out that in New York Times.
Wait, you little realize what I'm about to say. So, I tell myself, it's not my fault. I'm honest, I just can't reach everybody. And now it turns out that the guy who originally did do the movie thing, or presented to the movie, is being sued for plagiarism. And it may be a justified suit. I don't know. I kept far away. You understand? Clean hands. Anyway, it's been going on so far that I've suddenly begun to be a little nervous, because if he does lose the suit, and if it does get out, everyone's going to think that the guy who wrote it is the plagiarist and that I'm the guy who wrote it. So I am thinking of taking out an advertisement in the New York Times. So there. And as a matter of fact, I wrote a shocked letter to Bantam Books, which got me to write the thing in the first place, to say that in, I hate to say how many years, of professional work, never has the breath of scandal, the breath of literary scandal, been breathed in my direction, and that now I will have to engage in advertisements and all sorts of publicity to try to clear my precious name. And they said it wasn't going to happen, and besides, if it did, they would make sure that they were fully responsible for the clearing of my name. But I figure, what will all the advertisements in the newspapers, all the spot announcements on television, what will it mean with Lester Del Rey telling lies on the other side? Now, there must be something else besides this sad story that I wanted to tell you about so that you could be on my side. This year is a very important year in my life. It's 1968, and come October, although you won't believe it, I scarcely believe it, I will be celebrating my 30th anniversary as a professional writer, albeit I am but 28. Oh, I don't know. Youth is as youth does, kid. And whether you want samples or references.
How many years have you been 28 years old?
20 years.
What planet?
Listen, Earth is good enough for me. The rest of you can go back. I am distressed over this story about the trouble with Tribbles, I might say. I sat there, that's the one about the little fuzzy thing. I met the young fellow who wrote the story, He wrote me a letter, said he was coming to Boston, could he see me? And although I've heard horrible stories about this sort of thing, I nevertheless agreed. And he arrived, and he seemed quite a pleasant young fellow indeed. He was in his middle 20s, and he had already sold television. And here I am in my late 20s, and I had never sold television. So naturally, I was consumed with a ferocious envy. And I hated him, and he told me that actually he only made one sale. It was this trouble with Tribbles. And wouldn't I please watch him and let him know what I thought? And so I watched it. Now, the thing is, you have to remember is that I never read the Rolling Stones. You will say, how come you never read the Rolling Stones? And it's easy. I never read any science fiction story I strongly suspect will be better than what I do. Which means I don't read Heinlein, I don't read Arthur. All I read is Lester Del Rey. So, when I saw it, I thought it was very funny and very pleasant and very nice, and I sent him a letter saying so. Now, mind you, when I watched it, I was all prepared to hate it because, you know, all that envy. And to my great shock and astonishment and chagrin, I found I couldn't hate it, try as I might. You know, my essential integrity kept coming out, and I found myself liking it, so I wrote him a letter saying I liked it, and according to what he wrote me, if he's telling the truth, he's framed it. Now everyone says, not only is he a plagiarist, he applauds other people's plagiarism. Well, they've got me every way. I trust, Lester, that you're exaggerating and that the similarities aren't so great because I really like the kid.
1 to 1.
Good Lord. That's really disgusting. Oh, dear, dear. Well, as I said, I don't use bad language, so when I say dear, dear, this is the equivalent. Now, I am frequently asked why I don't write more science fiction. Judy-Lynn is asking me. That's Judy-Lynn Benjamin, the power behind the throne of Galaxy. And is Fred Paul around here? Fred's not here? That's Judy-Lynn Benjamin. She reads the stories and makes the decisions. So be nice to her. Fred's just the front man. Sure he's not here? Because, I mean, if he hears it, he fires her. You know.
I'm making a tape recording.
Pardon me? Oh, it is being, I like you, Fred. I'm just kidding. Okay. And not only do we get things like that, but Thursday night I spoke at MIT, and this reminds me, you guys don't know how lucky you are. If I charged what I charged MIT, and if Lester Del Rey charged what he usually charges, and Tom Purdom, and Harry Stubbs, or as you know him, Hal Clement.
Oh, I get the reserve point for most of my speeches.
Well, how much is that in money?
If I live to 100, about $25. Count towards my retirement.
If I give you $25, would you live to 100? It'd be worth it, you know. He's a nice guy. And there are very few science fiction writers. He's a very nice guy, really, and all the rest of us are crudds. Well,
You better be very careful whether you say in the next few minutes that you read me or not.
Of course I read you, Harry. Oh, you think I'm stuck? I'll explain. I don't read stories that are better than mine unless I like the author so much I'm glad he's better than I am.
Does that apply to him?
Of course it does. One of my favorite people. I mean, he's the kind of a guy, I tell you, that you could say, I'm leaving the room for a while, hold my girl for me. Really. Come back, not a fingerprint on her. Where was I? I was saying something. Oh, yes. Oh, I was talking at MIT, and in the back, I was suddenly reduced to a quivering mass of horror because they had a streamer from one end to the other. And this was in Kresge Hall, which seats 1,200, so it's a big place. It's almost full, too. And it said, Dr. A, when will you write another novel? And I suppose I get asked that more than any other question. Pardon me?
Did you give up your writing one?
Oh, well, I'll have to explain a few things. In the first place, you know, times change. Now, Harry Stubbs and I and Arthur Clarke and Lester Del Rey and a few others, when we write novels, we're stuck in a rut. We're still back 20 years where we think science is important and we try to be plausible and we have our cardboard characters, but our real life science. And you know, there's a faint flavor, and I won't speak for the others, just for myself. There's a faint flavor of olden times about it. There's a kind of distinct smell of lavender. I mean, people say, isn't that quaint?
A newly created NC.
True. These are new times. It is now 27 years since I wrote Nightfall, a story which seems to have been my peak. And times have changed. We now have a whole mess of new writers who
are a mess.
Well, who know as much about science as I do about Greenwich Village. And their stories are the thing now. And I have the feeling, whether I agree with them or I don't agree with them, this is the science fiction of today. And if I write, I'm a voice from the past. Now, I won't say that that's the reason I don't write, but I must admit there is an element of fear and anxiety in me when I contemplate writing a new novel. I have the feeling that I ought to read some of the work being done now very carefully and try to what is, well, I hate to say plagiarize. Emulate, very good, emulate. And the trouble is, I don't think I can. I think no matter how I chop it up and how I slice it, it's going to come out straight Asimov. And now this is... Yeah, but who are you and I against each other? Now, I argue with myself. I tell myself, well, heck, you know, it's not like my stories are off the stands. They keep reprinting them and they keep selling. And the foundation stories, which I wrote when I was in my 20s, and I wouldn't read on a bet. Early 20s? Oh, yes, early 20s. You know, that wins the Hugo for the best all-time series, and I feel guilty because I don't think it is. But apparently I'm the only one. And they put out Asimov's Mr. Larry Ashmead, my friend. He's a dear, sweet boy. He's an editor at Doubleday, and he really is the gentlest person I know. He makes Harry Stubbs look like a ferocious bump. And he's very fond of me, and I'm very fond of him. And he gets up to make a speech in front of the Science Fiction Writers Association, and he lists off the books in 1967 and gives how many were sold of each. And then he says, of course there are exceptions. In January 1968, Isaac Asimov put out a tired collection of old stories that have appeared a million times and sold more than any of them. And even if it was true, he didn't have to say so. They're my friends sitting there. Now just enemies, you know? But then comes another fear. Okay, I wrote all these things when I was in the prime of my powers, when I was in my early 20s. I knew what I was doing, and now I've been sort of lured into trying again when I'm in my late 20s. And I'm going to try to write another book and show how I have grown in the 3 or 4 years that I've aged. And you want to bet that everybody doesn't say, oh boy, this is rotten. I mean, this isn't like the old Asimov. I'm sure of it. In fact, 10 years ago, when I was about to celebrate my 20th anniversary as a science fiction writer, a professional science fiction writer, despite the fact that I was, at that time, only about 18, they Amazing Stories offered to reprint my very first published story, which appeared in their March 1939 story, just about the time I was being born. And it was called Marooned Off Vesta. Now, it's a curiosity, that story. It's my first published story. I don't think it represents me at my height, you know. And they wanted me to write another story, and they'd run them both, presumably to compare the two. So I wrote a story called Anniversary, and it's the same characters 20 years later. And so, I mean, this is a sort of corny thing I'm sure to do. And they ran them both, and I sat there in absolute terror for 3 or 4 months in between the time they said they were going to do it and the time they ran it. I don't think I ate one comfortable meal or slept one comfortable night because I kept waiting for the letters that would come in. I have just read Marooned Off Vesta and Anniversary, and I think that Isaac Asimov has declined. Or he isn't as good as he used to be, obviously. And Amazing, I told Amazing I was afraid of this, and they did the only thing that a decent science fiction magazine could do. They suppressed all the letters they received to that effect. And with a straight face told me they hadn't received any. People are always trying to make me feel better that way. All except Lester Del Rey, who's the only person who tells me the truth. Asimov, he says, you're great, but I'm not going to admit it. He said it, not me. I mean, I think I'm great, and I admit it. I was on the way here. I stopped off at the library to return books, the public library, and a woman says, "Aren't you Dr. Asimov?" And I said, "Yes." Always surprised, you know. And she said, "I heard you talk at Fort Hall Farm. You are pretty good." And I said, "I'm always pretty good." And she looked at me with astonishment. I said, "I'm always pretty modest, too." Drawing, and asked me for a short story, a short one, and offered me 50 cents a word, and my Damon wrote it instantly and sent it off. And so I've gotten to think that my Damon is money mad, you know? And I'm rather ashamed of him. So who knows? I may yet be writing more science fiction. But somehow... Any more questions? Yes, the young lady,
What do you think if maybe we all pick up a collection to tend to Damon? He might write a Star Trek.
You know, Gene Roddenberry has never asked me to write a Star Trek, and I've never suggested it, though we correspond. But you guys have to realize one thing. Writing for television is not like writing a story. I couldn't for 1 minute even begin. Holy smokes, have you got your wife here?
No, you promised to bring yours.
No. She's at home. I'll give you the address. I'll give you a taxi.
That wasn't the understanding. You were going to bring her here.
It's better at home.
You got a room?
No.
You don't have a room?
No, I don't have a room.
I'll go home.
Okay.
You're at home.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead. Fair enough. Fair enough.
How much money?
Usually my wife pays.
Is he your son, Dr. Asimov?
Huh?
Is he your son?
He's one of the few people in the science fiction world who's older than I am. I couldn't...
I deny that.
Ruth says you are.
All I know is that ever since you were ruthless, you're waiting.
It's all right. He always steals from me. What was it? Oh, yes.
Did I interrupt?
Huh? I'm not saying anything that can possibly be interrupted. To write television is completely different from writing ordinary things. I've seen television scripts. Not only could I not write one, but when I read it, I can't follow what's happening. You see, it's meant for, you have to be a visual kind of person, and I'm not visual, I'm words.
Tell a story, perhaps.
So you write a story, and then they convert it into a television script. So there's two things against that. In the first place, I'm constricted and condemned. In other words, the characters are all created. Spock's got to act like Spock. Scotty's got to act like Scotty. Chekhov's got to act like Chekhov, and so on. And while this is all very great, I'm not a skillful enough writer to be able to make all the characters act to order. They will invariably act the way I want them to act instead of the way they're supposed to act. Well, then we come to the second point. So the people on Star Trek can correct that, and if they want to take the trouble, why bother with a story by me that they have to hack up when they can get a story by a hack that they... No, that's not what I mean. Well, they can get one of their own stable of people to write one exactly right to begin with. But even if they want to, say for some reason they think that it's going to be of value to them to flash on the screen for 3/4 of 1 second the name. Have you ever noticed that? You watch, at the end, it says, costumes designed by Joe Schmo, and it sits there. You know, music by Chaim Yankel, and it sits there. Well, you have to come in at the beginning, where it says, story by... You miss it. You miss it. Obviously you miss it. You don't come in. You just run to the bathroom. You come back, first scene. Now it's a good one. Who wrote it? Who wrote it? They don't tell you at the end. They tell you everything else. Leave out the author's name. And not only that, nobody else has seen it. So you never know. Will TV Guide tell you no? Anyway, let us suppose that they find it valuable for some reason to flash my name for 3/4 of a second on. Now the question is, I've got to watch something with my name on it. I mean, I know it's there, even if no one's had time to see it, which has been completely hacked up. And, you know, I seem like an awfully nice fellow, sweet, easygoing, and all that. But there's some things which do turn me into a kind of ferocious madman, and one of them is putting my name on something I don't feel I've written.
Use a pen name.
I once did. I wrote Paul French because I figured those books might get on television. They never did.
They were good.
Oh, thank you, old boy. You're a fine, upstanding young man.
And you hate that?
In fact, somebody told me, the same guy who wrote The Trouble with Tribbles, that one time he saw Norman Spinrad sitting in the corner in the place where they were filming Star Trek, crying. Now, there's nothing. I frequently cry myself. I'm a very easy crier. But he was crying because they had hacked up his stuff he had written. He was watching them do it. It wasn't, and I would cry too. And that's the reason I don't try to write for Star Trek. I honestly don't think I'm good enough. Yes.
What's this rumor you've been spreading about the coming disappearance of women, or is it?
Oh, no, it's no rumor at all. It started this way. You know, I have become an expert in foretelling the future. And you say, how does one become an expert? Well, face it. Someone asks you, because you're a science fiction fan, what the future will be like. You fake an article, and one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you're the renowned world authority on the future. And if you think I'm kidding, if you look in the 1968 World Almanac, immediately after President Johnson's introduction, you will find, since it's their centennial edition, that they have a program on the next 100 years by me. And also, you will find in various other places. Well, it's a magazine called Textile World. Now, I never heard of a magazine called Textile World. You never heard of it. But it undoubtedly does a lot better than all the science fiction magazines put together. And they're running the 100th anniversary issue of something or other in April. And so they wrote me a letter saying, Dear Professor Asimov, would you please write an article for us for an untold sum of money? I mean it. For an untold sum of money entitled The Textile Industry in 2068. Well, now my heart broke, because I like that untold sum of money. And I wrote back and I said, gee, fellas, I'd love to, but I don't even know about where the textile industry is in 1968, you see? So they wrote back and said, oh, we know that. I mean, whenever I confess ignorance, the other guy always says, oh, we know that. But we will send you all the information, and you write the article anyway. So I said, okay. So they sent me all the information. I found it didn't help. Such is my ignorance of the textile industry that the only way I could be safe was to copy everything they sent me, word for word. Because as soon as I stepped 2 words to the right, I'd go down into the quicksand of ignorance. And I couldn't do that. Try as I might, I couldn't get rid of my last vestige of integrity and write something that wasn't mine, just for an untold sum of money. So I figured, since I had agreed to write them something by March 8th, I would write them an article about something I wanted to say, and every once in a while I'd stop and I would say, and the textile industry too. So I did, and I sent it off, and they loved it. They really did. I mean, they called up other people to tell them they loved it, and what I wrote in the article was essentially about the coming disappearance of women. I pointed out that the only differences between men and women, please don't improvise in the audience, the only differences between men and women are that women are smaller and weaker than men, and that women have to bear the children, which is a certain it's sort of troublesome. And that all other differences are really social. They are born. They are born of the environment. They're not real. I mean, like, for instance, you say that women can't add up columns. We all know women aren't mathematical, and they can't add up columns of figures. And then if you can't hire men tellers in the bank, you hire women tellers, and the banks continue right on going. Or you say women are so pure and sweet and nice, if only they had the vote, they would clean up politics. So you give them the vote, and politics is just as dirty as ever on account of women aren't any sweeter than men. They aren't less sweet, but they're no sweeter. So if the only real difference is that women are weaker and smaller, and that women bear children, well then, if we get into the 21st century, when all the work that's required to be done, and there won't be much of it, doesn't require muscles anyway, it's all a matter of closing contacts, pushing papers, whatever the heck you do, women can do it as well as men. And when it comes to children, we're going to have a low birth rate, we'll have to, or everything goes bluey. And in addition, children will be considered, I think, the responsibility of society and not the responsibility of their mothers. Children will be far too valuable to trust to their mothers, most of whom are complete incompetents as mothers. Therefore, there'll be no reason to have any differences, and women and men will be 2 unnoticeable varieties of human beings. Naturally, a particular man might be aware that a particular other person is a woman rather than a man, or a man rather than a woman, depending on what he likes. But that's his business and not everybody else's. You people are always going around objecting to the fact that these days boys are wearing long hair so they look like girls. You know, they get up and they turn purple in the face and they say, "Isn't it awful? Look at that guy with the long hair. You can't tell him from a girl." And the answer is, what do you want to tell him from a girl for? What have you got in mind? I mean, you see a couple of people 3 blocks away and you can't tell whether the Catholic from the Protestant. You can't tell the guy who's getting an A in school from the guy but it's important to tell whether it's a boy or a girl. You will never see them again your whole life. Furthermore, another piece of hypocrisy here is, in real nature, how do you tell boys from girls? Let's assume they're reasonably dressed, right? No improvisations from the audience. They're reasonably dressed. How do you tell a boy from a girl in the state of nature? Obvious. The fella has the facial hair, right? He grows a beard. Girl can't grow a beard. Okay. I mean, in the old days, the beard was terribly important. Secondary sexual characteristic. If you wanted to really insult a man, you plucked his beard. Anyone with a beard here? No. Yeah, right there. You gave a beard and you pulled. No, I won't. But this is what you did when you wanted to insult him, because you were manhandling the evidence of his virility. I mean, eunuchs don't grow beards. Now, this is important in a society in which there are eunuchs. The only definite way you can prove you're a eunuch in public is to have a beard. And if you want to insult a guy, well, I mean, I'm talking about a society of decent human beings. Well, and then if you want to insult a fellow, you call him a beardless youth in the old days. Nowadays, we have this habit, this custom of shaving off all the facial hair and making your skin just as smooth and baby-like as a girl. See? And now, do these same people who object to the long hair also go around saying, "Isn't it disgusting the way people shave?" I mean, you can't tell a boy from a girl when they shave. No. They grow a beard and they don't like that either. Well, anyway, this is the sort of article I wrote for Textile World, with everyone saying, and that goes for textiles too, and they're going, and they're going to publish it, and I haven't got my untold sum yet, but I expect it'll come. This
Try
is
depositing a check that reads for an untold.
well, what I mean by an untold sum is merely that I'm not telling you how much it's for, but it's for $1,000. It felt pretty miserable because the 2 Saturdays ago, when I wrote the article, I put the paper in the typewriter and sat staring at it. I wanted to write about textile industry, really about the textile industry, and I still didn't know anything, even though I had spread out on my table all the things about how they're going to spray clothes on you, and then you step into the shower and you wash it down the drain, you get out, you spray other clothes on you, or that they're going to press clothes instead of weave them, or that they're going to use textiles, strong textiles, to make suspension bridges out of them, or that they're going to take textiles which are going to come ready perfumed, so they always smell good, all sorts of things like that, and I couldn't do anything with it. So, as the paper was in the typewriter, it suddenly occurred to me, you know, I haven't cleaned up my files for years. So I cleaned out my files. It took me hours. And then I said, hey, I ought to wait and see if there's going to be any special delivery mail. And then I sharpened some pencils. I started doing all these things which writers do routinely every day they have to work, but which I never do, and I'm very proud of the fact that when I have to sit down and write, I sit down and write, none of this crap with delaying, you know? And now I found myself doing it, so I went down and beat my wife. And after a day of solid desperation, I wrote my article and not their article, and that was my Damon working. He absolutely refused to write the article I'd agreed to write. But it ended happily. You've got a question.
Yeah, because you and Harlan never straightened out how you two met after reading about the dangerous vision. It seems there were 2 meetings.
Well, yes, the truth and Damon's version. The truth and Harlan's version. What I wrote in Dangerous Visions is absolutely, terrifically, and absolutely, and terrifically, and absolutely, terrifically correct. I mean, I hadn't changed a word. It's exactly the way it happened. Harlan Ellison is an awfully nice guy, but he's belligerent. That's what he is. He likes to start fights, but I tell you, I've never known him to get vicious or anything, at least not with me. I mean, if we argue and he laughs when it goes against him, as I laugh when it goes against me, I'm not sincere. I hope he is. I remember once Randy Garrett and I, in the days before Randy Garrett and I had lost weight, we were at a convention. Now, I forget which one it was. Maybe it was the 1956 New York convention. And we came in a room like this, except bigger, and whoever it was who was ever supposed to start the festivities didn't. So Randy said to me, let's go up there and start ourselves. So we did. We went up, and we bantered back and forth. And both Randy and I think we're great at this impromptu joking, you see, and so we enjoyed it. I'm not sure about the audience. Anyway, Harlan Ellison came in from the back, took one look at what was happening as we were standing there, both in our lordly, portly ways. I mean, we were standing there in contact right here, but far enough apart otherwise so that if either one of us had halitosis, the other couldn't tell. And he said, aha, he says, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. At which point I said, you must understand the Harlan Ellison's about this talk. At which point I said, yes, Harlan, come up between us and be the hyphen. Now, Randy Garrett has a different version. And I like his version even better. The only trouble is, it's impossible for both versions to be simultaneously true. Because in both cases, it's not funny unless it's said instantly. And you can't say 2 different things instantly, you see? So now we'll start all over. I'm standing there, he's standing there, we're talking, having a hell of a lot of fun. Harlan Ellison comes in, a heck of a lot of fun. Harlan Ellison comes in and he says, oh ho, he says, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Whereupon I said, according to Randy, I said instantly, I'm D. And Randy didn't dare say anything. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Are you going to be writing any books, maybe with Gore Vidal after your appearance with Johnny Carson show?
Oh, boy. Listen, they've been talking, they called me in January. See, Doubleday called me up and asked me would I come on the Johnny Carson show, and I said, if it happens during one of the times when I'm in New York, I won't make special trips. I hate traveling. So they said, yes, we've arranged so that you'll go on next Thursday when you're coming into New York anyway. Whenever I come into New York, I make a date with Doubleday so they know when I'm coming in. You have to be interviewed by the, what do they call them? These, not publishers. Producer. You have to be interviewed by the producer, and it's just a routine thing. You'll be on that same night. So I was interviewed by the producer, and I said, do I go on tonight? He says, well, no, you'll be going on next week. So I said, no, I said, my next time I come in will be February 15th. And he said, well, no, Johnny Carson will be in California then. How about February 29th? And I said, the time after that I come in will be March 14th. So he said, all right, we'll do it March 14th. And I said, thank you, and I left. Now, I was sure they wouldn't. It was a case of, we'll call you, don't call us. I mean, I was infuriated because they didn't have me on that day. I mean, I don't stand on, I mean, I'm not so great on how important I am, but I am a science fiction writer, and he wasn't. I mean, noblesse oblige. So I forgot about it. I figured that was the end. Of course, in fact, just to show you, I was supposed to send in material to Johnny Carson so he'd know what to ask me, and I never did. So, anyway, a week before March 4th, they called me up. I was really going to be on. I still didn't believe it. I came in on March 14th. I was interviewed. I showed up, and the usual thing happens, you know. I'm on the dot. I'm always on time. I'm early. This thing started at 1:30, 1 o'clock today. I was here at 12 o'clock. So, I come in there 1 hour early. No one pays any attention to me except an usher who sees me standing around and says, do you have a reserved seat? And I said to him, mildly, only in front of the cameras, but. And still nothing happened. Then we start the program, and I realize I'm the last one on, they told me, the last one. And this showgirl comes on, and she starts talking and telling an interminable story. And it goes on, and it goes on, and goes on. It's the sort of thing which has vague connotations of ribaldry. One gets the idea that she's been living it up with a series of men. So naturally, Johnny Carson keeps her on as long as possible, and everybody's laughing. And I'm boiling, because if I'm going to sit there all night and not even get on, so I get up from the viewing room, out into the corridor, and I start marching up and down the corridor. Now, ordinarily, when my face is in repose, it looks belligerent. So people tell me. When I really feel angry, it looks mad, sort of. I don't mean mad angry, I mean mad insane. Anyway, someone caught sight of me walking up and down, and they quick rushed in and bounced someone else. And I got on anyway. Now, at all times that Johnny Carson mentioned my name, he called me Isaac Asimov. And this is the only thing people remember from the entire show. And as I was marching up and down the corridor, I said to myself, when I get in, I'm going to sit down and say to him with a kind of infuriating calm, I'm going to say to him, you mispronounced my first name, Joni. But I didn't say it because I didn't have the guts. And it's been consuming me ever since. I feel I've betrayed the world of science fiction. I have the feeling that Harlan Ellison would have had the guts. Because Harlan Ellison's always in trouble. Are there any more? Incidentally, you know, I'm supposed to quit at 4 and it's 5 after 4. Don't let me talk forever. Well, yeah.
I'll pay you double time.
I read Rudolph Lester an Anniversary last night, and I liked the second one better.
Oh, there's a nice guy. Yes?
Are you going to attend the premiere of 2001?
I've been written a letter. No, I'm glad you. Gee, I wish I'd think of talking about these things without being asked. I've been sent a letter saying that 2 tickets were going to be sent me for the premiere, and I'm in 2 minds, you see, because I have a feeling if I go there, that it'll turn out to be all very good, and I'll be overcome with my usual ferocious envy. On the other hand, Arthur Clarke is my favorite science fiction writer, except for the people in this room, naturally, and I like him very much. There's one thing that bothers me. They took a series of movies of various people who they thought might have influence in connection with this movie, and asked them questions about life on other worlds and all that, and they were going to flash it before the movie starts as a kind of come-on gimmick or something, and I was one of the people. And they brought the cameras down to Boston University, and they emptied out one of the rooms while all the other faculty members stood around and watched, you know. The famous man is having a movie made of him. And in the letter in which they said they were going to send me 2 tickets, it says, unfortunately, owing to some technical difficulties, that portion of the movie in which you appeared will not be shown. And now I'm furious. I'm easily furious.
Notice that the cap was on the lens.
It wasn't, but I heard that cracking sound. The Encyclopedia Britannica is putting out, come October, the Encyclopedia Britannica Yearbook of Science in the Future. This is the first time they're putting out such a thing, and presumably, if it succeeds, it'll be an annual thing. And they wanted me to write for them an article entitled A History of Speculative Science Fiction, except I think they've changed the title. And I gladly did it because, you know, I thought it'd be good to have science fiction discussed in a book like this, and it'd be nice to have someone do it aside from the usual jerky non-science fiction personality who gets in and talks about H.G. Wells, you know, and thinks that's it. No, I have no objection talking about H.G. Wells, but that doesn't end it, you know? So I wrote the article and very carefully mentioned as many of my friends as I could. Lester Del Rey is mentioned, Harry Stubbs is mentioned, Fred Pohl is mentioned, all the things like that there. And I just a few days ago got back their copy-edited version in which everyone except for H.G. Wells and George Orwell and Aldous Huxley and things like that is cut out. Now, I had already gone around telling all these people I mentioned your name. So, fortunately, there's such a thing as a telephone. I called them up in Chicago, collect, I'm not Harlan Ellison. And I said, listen, it's all right for you to hide in the building there in Chicago, but I've got to go to conventions. I've got to face my friends. I said, every single one of those names has to go back in. Now, I cooperated with you, and you've got to cooperate with me. And so they promised. And I put all the names back in the copy-edited version, and Harry, you're going to be there, and Lester, you're going to be there, and you know what kills me? Ben, I didn't mention your name. And Tom Purdy, you know, I'm ruined. I'm going to be coming across for the next year people whose name I didn't mention. I shouldn't have mentioned it. You can't mention them all. I shouldn't have mentioned any.
Did you mention Harlan?
Yes, I did. As a matter of fact. Well, at the end, they wanted me to discuss the new wave. You know, I mentioned there was a new wave, so they wanted me to discuss it. So I mentioned Harlan's I've Got a Mouth. No, I have no mouth, but I was... And I described them as the angriest of science fiction's new crop of angry young men, and I don't know that I'll live. Yes?
There was an article in a recent magazine about by Harlan Ellison, panning people who did not mention, who misquoted an author as having written one of his CDs. Did you see that?
No, I did not. But why did you think that I might have seen it? He hadn't by any chance said anything about me, did he? I always do things about me.
But I was just wondering what you thought of it.
No, I wish I...
Quite zero. It's long enough to require serialization.
You have to understand, Harlan is a throwback. None of you are old enough to remember the golden age of science fiction fandom. If you read fan magazines these days, you are reading pap. You are reading pabulum. In the old days, and by that I mean the late 30s and early 40s, about the time I was born, fan magazines were virile stuff in which every darn letter was a kind of lawyer's sample for vile slander, libel. There wasn't a fan magazine published that wasn't actionable. And what's more, every science fiction fan personality was actioning all over the place. There were more lawsuits started and never finished because they canceled each other out. And what's more, every science fiction fan personality was actioning all over the place. There were more lawsuits started and never finished because they canceled each other out. The very letter which announced that person A was going to start a lawsuit against person B gave person B a chance to start a lawsuit against person A. Well, now, we have Dave Kyle is laughing because he knows exactly what I mean. Well, now, we have now Harlan Ellison, who belongs to that era. It is impossible for him to write a non-actionable letter. He means well. When he writes a letter which sounds virulent, he's just being sweet and mild. He hasn't the slightest idea he's being virulent. And the one advantage is that you can say anything you want to Harlan, and he doesn't realize that you're being actionable. You understand? He thinks this is the way people talk. I walked into the New York convention last year, and there he was with a young girl. He's always with a young girl. And I forget exactly how it goes, but I said at one point, "How old are you?" And she said, "Old enough." Now, mind you, I'd just been put down by Harlan 3 or 4 times. And she said, "Old enough." And I said, "Well, I'm glad, Harlan, because after all," I said with a straight face, "I don't want you to get in trouble, like the last time." There was no last time, you know. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
You've got at least one more book you have to read. I understand that you began it some years ago.
Oh, the third book of the Lige Bailey. There's 4 chapters sitting around the bottom of one of my desks. Yeah, I sometimes think I can if I try hard enough, but it's not fair. Maybe someday I will write it. But you know, it's already so long since I wrote the first and second, I'm not sure if I can put myself back in.
Try to read them.
Oh, how cruel you are! Listen, you're gonna run yourself out of it at 4:30. There starts a panel. You've already got only 15 minutes of relaxation.
Mr. Campbell hasn't arrived yet.
Mr. Campbell hasn't arrived?
No. You will be the last item on the program for today, preceding an auction.
I'll be the last night preceding an auction. Oh. Say, but John Campbell's got to come. Won't he be here at all?
I don't know. He's scheduled to come. Do you know anything?
Listen, John Campbell is a very nice guy. There isn't an idea he has that I don't disagree virulently with. And we've had to discontinue our long-standing correspondence because the arguments between us got entirely too violent. But except for the fact that he's the world's biggest wrong thinker, except for that, he's a nice guy and I love him. He doesn't mean bad at all. He doesn't mean ill at all. He can't help it. He honestly thinks he's thinking straight. But I am. And don't think I didn't notice you signed the wrong petition there, Harry. It's all right. He's the Air Force Reserve. He's got it. So. Anyway, let me tell you about John Campbell. Harlan Ellison says something about John Campbell, and I have to tell you the Harlan Ellison says this because I won't claim something that's not mine. And it's absolutely the perfect portrait in 2 sentences of John Campbell there is. Pretend I'm John Campbell. I start off, I say, Peg and I. Now, Peg is Mrs. Campbell, a very nice woman. But he always says Peg and I the way Nixon always says Pat and I. Peg and I have been working on the proposition that you cannot persuade people by lecturing them. And if you'll listen to me, I'll tell you why. Fred Pohl, on the other hand, he tells the story of John Campbell, which is even crueler, I think. You have to understand that John Campbell has suffered considerably from asthma in years past. And also in years past, he's been very interested in Dianetics, which was a kind of device, which is a kind of pseudo-scientific Christian science. That's what it amounts to. I mean, you know, if you talk long enough, you will cure whatever's wrong with you. And if you have faith. Anyway.
Laryngitis.
I'm immune to it. If you're hinting. Anyway, Fred Pohl would say that John would be sitting right across the table from him and saying like this: I have undergone Dianetic treatment myself, and while I am not completely cleared, it remains true that my physical ailments that I have suffered with for years have been cured. And you have no idea how this sort of destroys the illusion of excellence as far as Dianetics is concerned. You realize that it is only when I speak to a science fiction audience that I am not asked the question about flying saucers. When I speak to any other audience on any subject, I swear I could go into a biochemistry class and talk about the Krebs cycle. And some kid will get up and say, speaking about isocitric acid, sir. And the entire thing is because I'm a science fiction writer. All non-science fiction people think that science fiction writers believe in flying saucers because why else why not if they're science fiction writers? Well, Fred Pohl said yesterday that he didn't know, with the possible exception of A.E. Van Vogt, of a single science fiction writer who was hooked on flying saucers. And that strikes me, if I may be serious for a moment, as a very interesting thing. Science fiction writers are viewed very often by the general public as being kind of nutty people. Really, it's sort of their way out. They're out of touch with reality. And yet, you know, when something comes along which is out of touch with reality, it's the general public that falls for it, not the science fiction writer. We know what reality is because if we didn't know what reality was, we couldn't play fast and loose with it the way we do. Any jerk can be far out, but only a person who knows what far in is can be far out successfully. And I have tried to get this across to non-science fiction people. I have said to them, why should I believe in flying saucers? Do you suppose that a writer of children's fantasies thinks that rabbits really do talk? But all these subtle things goes right over their heads. And we're reduced to the proposition that people believe crazy things not because the truth has not been explained to them at all. They believe crazy things because they're crazy. Anything more?
What do you do at BU?
What do I do at BU? Well, my first 9 years at BU, I was a full-time teacher and researcher. That went right up to 1958, by which time I'd become an associate professor of biochemistry, and at least one person in high office was staring at me cross-eyed because I had by that time dropped all my research and was spending all my time when I wasn't teaching writing. Now, I had two kinds of writing. I had science fiction and plain science writing, and I wrote my science writing at school because I considered that scholarly endeavor, and therefore within the scope. My science fiction, no matter how bad my deadlines were, I wrote at home on my own time. He called me in, this fellow, and he said he wanted me to do research. He didn't want me to do science writing, he wanted me to do research. Now, I suspect his motives. When you do research, you get grants from the government, and 40% of the grant goes to the school for overhead. When I write, I get royalties from the publishers, and nothing goes. So, I tried to explain to him that this was not right, that I wanted to be a science writer because I was a great science writer. I tried to say so. I said, look, sir, I said, I'm a great science writer. I'm probably the best in the world, and I think I should. On the other hand, I said, as a researcher, I'm only run-of-the-mill, perfectly adequate, but only run-of-the-mill. I said, and then looking him straight in the eye, I made one of the more colossal blunders. I said, and if there's one thing that Boston University School of Medicine doesn't need, it's another merely run-of-the-mill. I lost the argument right there. So he said, well, he said coldly, we can't afford a science writer, and so we will cancel your, we can't afford a science writer, he said. I said, well, you don't have to, I said. You don't have to pay me anything. Of course, if you don't pay me, I don't lecture. But you don't have to pay me. So he said, fine, we'll end your appointment in June. And I said, no, you won't. I've got tenure. I said, you can keep the money, but I keep the title. And he said, you don't have tenure. And I said, we did. And that started a heroic 2-year fight. Now, there's no use going into details, but that was 10 years ago, and as of this moment, my title is Associate Professor of Biochemistry at Boston University School of Medicine. They haven't paid me in 10 years, but that's all right, because it turned out recently, I calculated out their annual payment to me, and it turns out to be 3 weeks' earnings as a writer. So, however, the situation has changed. The gentleman with whom I've had the argument is no longer on active duty. He's retired. Everybody at the school now loves me dearly. I lecture occasionally for them. I'll be lecturing for them on March 27th, and I'll be lecturing again on May 4th, I believe. They are very pleased and happy with me for no other reason than I am exactly what I told them I was, the greatest science writer in the world. You know, I mean, why should they think I'd lie to them? And that's my connection with Boston University School of Medicine, whoever it was who asked.
Did you get office?
Huh? No, because I don't need any. I come in once a week and pick up my mail. I've got mail space. I've got a little cubbyhole where my letters are. And the girls have strict orders, never, no matter how it says, important, urgent, must get there, vital, life or death, never, never, never forward it. Because that's my excuse. I come in once a week and pick it up. And by walking in that way, you see, I keep my franchise. Wait. Is this, I keep calling from the front. Is there someone in back by any chance? Lester, you have a question, Lester?
Yeah, when are you going to write science fiction?
Lester's my friend. There are things about Lester I love.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I have a question about the Intelligent Man's Guide to Science. Who wrote the script for the movie?
Yeah, well, someone wrote the script for the movie, and I wrote a book from it, yes. As a matter of fact, I received a letter from a guy recently. I get all kinds of letters, but this one gripes me. He said he had read the section in the New Intelligent Man's Guide to Science on psychology and found it very poor. I had ended my discussion of behaviorism with a guy called Watson, and I didn't even mention the work of B.F. Skinner. And he's perfectly right. I didn't, and that's my fault. And in the next edition, the new Intelligent Man's Guide to Science, I will mention it. However, his last sentence was, your inaccuracy with respect to psychology, which is my field, leads me to suspect the accuracy of the rest of the book. And that bothered me because psychology isn't my field. And it really wasn't. The section really wasn't very good. But just because I'm not very good in things that aren't in my field doesn't mean I'm not very good in things that are in my field. And most of the rest of the book was in my field. You know, chemistry, physics, biochemistry, all in astronomy, all in my field. So I wrote back and I said, the gratuitous insult in your last paragraph causes me to doubt your knowledge of psychology. Yes?
Well, I think interesting theory of time dilation, you know, like your age and everything. When did you get your doctor's degree?
I got my doctor's degree. No, I got my doctor's degree in 1948 when I was something like 8 years old or so. Actually, if you must know, I was born on January 2nd, 1920. I am 48 years old. 48 years young. My only satisfaction is that I don't feel any older than you know, you get old, you can't run up the stairs anymore. Well, I can. And you can't do push-ups anymore. Well, I can. But the thing is, when I was 19, I couldn't either. So this is my advice. If you don't want to grow old, never be physically fit. The few things I could do when I was 19, I can still do. Whatever they are. Yes?
I understand that recently you commented, made a prediction as to the current presidential election.
Oh, I said Nixon would be our next president, right? Yeah, I don't blame you for not applauding. I also said...
Who will be the next Lord Protector of the Realm?
I also said that the only possible comfort you could get out of having Nixon become president, and it sets a world's record in minimum comfort, is the fact that he would at least beat Johnson. And if Nixon runs against Johnson, I'm going to sleep for all of Election Day. I don't intend to wake up. I'm not even going to listen to the results, because I won't really care. However, listen, I can't get any laughs out of this.
You're right.
I know I'm right.
So why laugh? Why don't you run?
I'm not a native-born citizen. I was born in Russia, thank God. And not that I was born in Russia, but just that I don't qualify to be president. Yes, dear. Good Lord, I can't understand the southern accent. Speak louder.
In 1964, an auction, I don't know about anywhere else, sports car fans, licensed people were running down and
Oh, dear, I didn't know that. But tell me, what state do you come from? Good Lord. I didn't mean it about Johnson.
I agree with.
Oh.
So you had there were about 10 of us for you.
Oh, really? Oh, how nice. Just nice. Leave it.
Dr. Asimov,
Yes?
your hour of deliverance has come.
Good. 4:30. Very good.